It's a good thing I do the editing because I already messed up this episode.
We don't know why there was a countdown to begin with, but
I was
wondering what we were doing.
It was really epic.
This is new that we're starting with a countdown.
Like
the build up.
So
the build up that was coming.
Satisfying.
It was great for me. It was just like,
done.
Yeah. I do feel like it's incomplete. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the rest of the countdown later just so I can go to sleep tonight. So
I just to make this environment of suspense and satisfiedness and then stomp it in the ground so no one.
Well, what'll be really nice is that countdown's gonna sound really great on the audio episode where people can't see that it's a countdown.
What is this noise? But welcome everyone to AOG the podcast.
Hello and
hi.
And welcome. Tonight we're doing something a little different. We've had a question that has come up a few times, and we are going to be talking about how to get started reading comics, because this has come up in some of our various podcasts, especially with the Marvel movies, the new DC movies, and in the other independent comic movies. People are kind of like, so we're going to read more about these characters. So we figured, why not kind of give a primer on how to do so? And in order to do this, we asked our good friend Chris Hoffman from Velleity Studios to sit in and kind of weigh in on his history with comics and getting started and how we can do this. Howdy. Yeah, I've been reading comics for like a year, so I know a lot.
Wow,
this is going to be a short episode, Dad.
The amount of comics you have behind you for having only read for a year, Chris, is amazing.
It's pretty good. Yeah, you got these all at a garage sale. Yeah, I don't even know who's in this.
That's productive. And a great garage sale.
You're going to start making my husband go to garage and estate sales, and we don't need to do that Saturdays. Come on.
Honestly, Steph, I'm surprised Blake doesn't go to more garage and estate sales.
I've looked into it, and it just seems too scary because it's like
garage sailing.
Well, no. What I've looked into is
the old lady at the garage sale gonna bite you?
No. What I've looked into is where you buy the storage unit, and they're like, who knows what's behind number one?
That's ever so slightly different. Slightly different.
That's a jump from what we were talking about. It's like going to an estate sale where we're so sorry for your loss, so let's see what the old guy had to
Blake grew up rich, so he never had to do garage sales.
Yeah.
I mean, I had
I'll take you to a garage sale sometime, Blake. If you're scared of the garage sales, we can go together.
Guys. Thanks, guys.
Age of Geek at the garage sale coming soon to a podcast near you.
What I meant was the storage unit sales. Anyway.
Well, I feel like before we get too much into our topic, we should probably acknowledge the other guests that we have here. I mean, I think everyone recognizes Hobbs' voice because he's been on here before, but first time to Age of Geek podcast, we have Jayson.
Welcome, Jayson.
Hello.
Who is my husband and part of Age of Geek and all that fun stuff. And he was on a Stolen Droids episode when we were that namesake before. We did. Did we
also known as the Fight in Ginger.
I can't remember anything.
I think we talked about WandaVision, maybe. It was a while ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's also been in the background a lot, just, supporting and helping out, and especially with the comic book conversations. He was definitely one of the ones that was like, I want to do this, but I don't know how.
Yep,
so
I'm the resident noob.
So, gotta start somewhere, and that's fine.
I do think we should go back to Chris, though, because I don't think you've only been reading comics for a year.
Yeah.
We should probably really establish your actual credentials here.
Actual credentials here. Got it. So I am, Chris Hoffman. So I'm co-founder of Velleity Studios, which is a local comic book publisher here in Salt Lake City, Utah. We publish a comic book called The Salt City Strangers, which is about a set of, it's as if the Avengers were in Salt Lake. Most superhero comic books take place in New York or some sort of version of New York. So having a comic book take place in Salt Lake City is an exotic location for most people. We have a breakout character from that one, who's the Gull. All the superheroes are Utah themed, right? So it's the Golden Spike, Den Mother, Son of Bigfoot, Deputy Deseret, and the Gull. The Gull became so popular he spun off into his own comic, and so I used to teach comic book artwork at
Broadview University in South Salt Lake. And so it was a comic book where we'd have the students, if they wanted to, they could write and do like an 8-page story of the gull, and then we'd print it in the comic. And those 2 books, it's the 10-year anniversary of those characters.
Wow.
Which is pretty great and crazy to think about. And our latest book that we're trying to get to a bigger publisher is called Ruthless. That's going to be that's a little bit more of a more adult book. Pretty excited about that one. And it's about a high school girl who gets bullied, and after a tragic event in her life, instead of turning to like a superhero and getting good advice, she turns to a supervillain and becomes a supervillain. And so that
I support that.
We're
That
just
reminds me of
about
a series I read called Worm.
yeah. There's one called there was a Furious came out from Dark Horse Comics, which was a similar vein. No idea how to get to a bigger publisher. We're going to be figuring that out over the next year or so. And then I used to, I've been a fan of comic books ever since I was a kid. Comics Utah. What was that?
So about a year.
About a year. 1 year. Yes. I started with reading Walking Dead. No, that's Charles. Actually, Charles from the Nerd Store. That's where he started. So yeah, but no, I used to work in a comic book store. In 1993, I worked in Comics Utah, which was one of the best comic book stores here in the state. I worked there for a couple of years, right during the crash of comic books in 1993, when the overprinting and the bad business decisions and the speculative market all came to a head. And imagine the housing crisis, but only in comic books. This is
It was a
crazy
wild time. The 90s was wild for comics.
Yes. Yeah, so many terrible decisions and stuff, and we almost lost even having a Marvel around, So when you look back at it and think about the fact that it was just almost not a thing anymore, it was pretty crazy. But yeah, all during that time, watched it build up and then crash and then left. So yeah, that's and we still Velleity. What we do is we help people publish their own comic books. So if people come with an idea, we help them figure out how to fundraise for their book, and then we'll help them go through the process of publishing the comic, getting it printed, sending it out to everybody, and getting it on the store shelves of the stores here in Utah that we're friends with, and then hopefully launching them into bigger and better careers so that they can look back and help us along as well.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Thanks.
Nice.
So you're new to this, man. Wrong person to have on the podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Blake, while we have
Honored
your logo
to be here,
up,
by
is
the
there
way.
any-
Thanks for having me.
I think you're talking about me.
So we should probably just
Blake, did
jump
you want
in.
to say anything about yourself really quick since you're a guest? I put your logo up just so people know who you are.
Yeah, people know that it's my moment.
Yeah.
I'm Blake. I'm Steph's husband.
The Marquise Do podcast, you mean?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I don't really have my own podcast, but I like to be a part of this one, and I like to hang out, and I love comics, and I thought it'd be fun to come talk about it.
All right, that's it. Now you can't talk the rest of the show. I put your logo off, so
That's fine. That's fine. It's okay. That's fine.
So really, we should just jump right in. And how do you get started reading comics? The first question is, why do you want to start reading comics? And do you have a subtle hint? There's not really a wrong answer to this. It could be that you've seen a movie that had characters that you're like, I'd like to know more about them. Could be that you heard a friend talking about the books. Could be a TV show that you've seen. It could be any number of things. You're just kind of like, I'm curious, but how do I get started? There's any number of ways to start. One is, figure out who the characters are that are interesting to you, for one. There is a glut of them from the Marvel and the DC universes, as you've seen from countless movies that have come out in the past 15 to 20 years. You pick one of them and kind of go, but then there's the question of, well, this character's been around for 80 years or 60 years. What do I do? And you can either go with the tried and true tradition of finding a number one, because lately the publishers have been reprinting rebooting some continuities. So getting in on the ground floor of a new continuity with a character that you've got some familiarity with is a great way to do it. Sometimes they will do a legacy character will take over the name or the mantle of a character, and you can get into ground floor with the number one with that character, and then kind of work backwards if you choose to learn about different characters. So Chris, when you started, where did you start with reading comics way back when?
Way back when? I mean, this was like, what TV shows did you watch back when there were 3 channels, right? Like you went to the grocery store or the 7-Eleven, right? And you looked at the spinner rack and whichever ones were still there. When I was a kid, I just bought the comics from the characters who looked the coolest. And so tons of Spider-Man, Ghost Rider is a favorite. That the going back and reading Ghost Rider, especially the 70s one, it's not great. You know what I mean? He looks so cool. And that's every Ghost Rider comic almost ever. Like you sit there and read it and like, well, he looks neat. But yeah, that's a lot of where I started with comics was with big name characters and Marvel. I'm such a Marvel zombie that everything's Marvel. So like when I'm watching the new DC movies and stuff like that, I'm being introduced to a ton of characters and people that I don't have a huge history with, and so that's kind of fun. But yeah, like popular characters, is a reason they're popular, right? And the reason that lots of people like them.
Yeah, when you were talking about working or teaching comics, I didn't start reading comics or graphic novels till college, and it's because I worked at the USU bookstore, and I saw some like graphic novels up on the shelves, and I'm like, what are these doing here? This is odd. This is college. And actually, one of the first books I ever picked up was Mouse, because I stopped and like looked at it while I was shelving books, and that really opened my eyes to what graphic novels and comics could be about, and about how people look down on like graphic novels, comics, even though art doesn't exist in a vacuum and is written for reasons and emulates what's going on during the times that they were made. So it was kind of interesting to go from like Mouse, and then I grabbed a couple.
Give an explanation as to what
Mouse is about. World War II. It likens the mice to the Jewish people and the Nazis to cats. So just the power differential, the power dynamic between them, about how cats attack like the mice to get them out of their homes and take them somewhere else.
And it was required reading for a college course, right? That's why
it was. And now in a lot of places it's banned reading because it's a heavy topic. It's not light reading. Not that like comics are all light reading. There's a lot of superhero comics, a lot of that focus on really dark materials. So I think that, yeah, people who haven't experienced might look at it like, well, it's comic, like this is for children.
And that kind of goes along with the stigma of comics in America, or animation even in America. They're looked at as a lesser art form, but other cultures embrace them fully and use them to tell some fantastic stories. Not that American writers don't, but I think that a lot of, especially the older generation, looks at comics and goes, oh, it's just funny books, and they liken them to the Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck comics, or the Richie Rich comics that they read when they were young, but never had any real meat or substance to the stories that they told. They were just really fluff pieces.
Right. S.C. Hinton was who wrote The Outsiders and like Tex, which are really influential books for like teen years. The Outsiders I read like 17 times.
I love those books.
They're so good. But yeah. S.C. Hinton was approached to do a graphic novel of The Outsiders, and she said that is for children. Like she didn't want them to make it, and they still haven't made it because she didn't think that it was the
medium wouldn't support the telling that she's trying to tell.
But she said it more not offensively, but likened it into children's writing, which is really like sad to me because I love her. I love her writing. I've read most of what she's written, and then to have her say something like that was disheartening.
I'd love to hear from Jayson right now because of what Robert just said. Jayson has had a lot of experience in anime and manga, and he's wanting to come into, I guess, American comic books. So what has been your experience with manga and stuff like that?
Yeah, I've read manga since I was about like 13 years old. Like just reading stuff, web stuff online. And yeah, I guess I do have a lot of experience reading that. I guess I didn't realize that. But I guess I've always kind of liked comic books, but I never like dove into them. And I had a friend who bought me Spider-Man Blue because he knows I love Spider-Man. And he got it for me, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool artwork. I'll just put it up on my wall." And I never really cracked it open. And like over the year or so since he gave it to me, he's shamed me every single time until I just felt so horrible. So I finally opened it up and read it, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, this is like American manga." You know, and it was really cool because this story is just a different take on Spider-Man. It's basically Peter Parker's got this relationship with Gwen, and Mary Jane kind of acts as like a vixen, like somebody who kind of tries to steal him away. And I've never seen that like aspect of Mary Jane before. And it introduces Craven, and he kind of like uses all the different animal like villains to like hunt Spider-Man. And it was just like a really, really cool twist on the story I never would have gotten through like mainstream media Spider-Man. So now, like, because of that, I'm like super interested in finding more stories like that, you know, of characters I love, like Spider-Man, like Deadpool and X-Men and all that stuff.
Well, there's a guy right there that could, definitely point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because you just hit all of his keyword characters pretty much.
Yeah.
I
You
like
hit
how
that-
you- I
Oh,
was
go
gonna say, I like how your Deadpool shirt kind of emulates your chair. Like it's like the stripes, and then it goes back onto your chair.
Oh, no. He planned that.
You're put together. The fit, I think. Is that what the kids say
It
these
is the
days?
fit.
Is
The
the
fit,
fit?
yes.
Yeah, that's what the
Fit.
kids say.
Okay.
Yeah, this is definitely the right audience to confirm
Yeah.
what the kids say today. So
Wonderful. The darn kids. They don't appreciate comics enough with their manga and everything. Actually, that's 100% where I got my kids more into comics, is because they are into anime and manga. And my my son, my older son, who's 17, he likes the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He absolutely loves Berserk, and but he loves those. And so I'll be like, with like a comic I like, and be like, here's one that's similar to like the genres that you dig. And so we try to do both the things together, where like we went to an anime convention this weekend and go to Comic-Con and whatnot, so that we can kind of share this together. Jayson, you reminded me, if you want to read a really cool Spider-Man story, Spider-Man Life Story is really cool. It's by Chip Zdarsky, and it's a telling of Spider-Man through the decades. So there's an issue for each decade that he's been around, so 60s, 70s, 80s, but it shows him growing up through those time frames, and the story and the visual style changes based on where it was at the time. So it's like a full Spider-Man story and he gets like older throughout the story. It's not a continuity story. It's sort of like a what if, but it's a fabulous read, and it's a self-contained thing. So if you just want to, you don't have to have any history with it or anything like that, but it's really cool.
What's that one called again?
Life Story by Mark Bagley and Chip Zdarsky.
That's super cool because you always just get like teenage, like early 20s, or maybe even high school Spider-Man. You never get old Spider-Man, I want to know what happens like earlier or beyond. That's really cool.
Yep. And if you start digging too much into Spider-Man origin, it can get overwhelming really quickly.
Yeah.
He was a clone. What? Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he was a clone for a while, and then he made everybody forget that he was married. And you get to the point where you're like, oh, whatever, it's fine.
Well, another good jumping on point, and this is at this point 20 years removed. Back in either 2000 or 2001, Marvel spun off some of their main titles into the Ultimate Universe, and what they decided to do was popular characters like Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, who are retitled the Ultimates in this universe, and some other characters, they decided to just go back to the beginning and restart everything and make it a very easy, low barrier to entry for everybody.
Oh, cool.
And the
That's weird.
Spider-Man story was fantastic. And spoiler alert, that's where you get Miles Morales because, spoiler alert, part 2, Peter Parker dies. But the run,
Those that haven't seen Into the Spider-Verse.
yeah, it's very similar to Into the Spider-Verse in that sense, but not in the same way that it happened.
No,
But
it was different.
it was different. But I mean, it was a fantastic storytelling. It was, I think that Bendis was writing it. Brian Michael Bendis was the
It was
author
Brian
on that
Michael
title
Bendis.
for that one. I cannot remember who did the X-Men title. And then you find out that by keeping it small and only focusing on the Ultimates, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man, they were able to keep it very closely knit and weave some of the storylines together without it being too sprawling an adventure that you'd have to be like, I've got to get 15 books over here and 19 books on this side. It was, you could say within your favored title, if you weren't getting all 4, and get the meat of everything, and maybe have to get maybe 1 or 2 issues outside of that to get a storyline if they did crossover. And they started with the younger characters. They updated the origins so it wasn't quite so, we don't understand this bit of science, so we'll just kind of fudge it and call it good. Cosmic rays, we'll just call it that. Everybody will be fine. But Peter was bitten by a genetically modified spider, for example. The X-Men were the
GMOs.
The X-Men were the product of a very secret experiment that was done on a population. The Fantastic Four were exploring interdimensional travel, and it went wrong. But you get familiar touches, familiar faces, and the Ultimate characters actually line up a little better for many people with the MCU characters than the characters that have been around since the late 60s, for example, because the origins are a little more in line with that. And that's also where you get the Nick Fury in the MCU first appeared in, I believe it was the X-Men title, in the Ultimate Universe. And they actually, when they were deciding to redo Nick Fury, they were like, we want him to be really cool. Who can we get? And at a lark, they were like, let's try to get Samuel L. Jackson. So they said, do you mind if we use your likeness? And he's like, no, that's fine. and literally that's where the Ultimate Universe Nick Fury started looking like Samuel L. Jackson. So when they started the movie universe, like 7 years later, they were like, hey, we should do this
good
thing
in this role.
And 20 something movies later,
he was in the movies.
Pardon me?
They got his likeness for the comic books before he was in the movies. Oh,
Yep.
wow, that's so cool.
I mean,
You
it
have to
wasn't
be like a
perfect,
really cool
but it was really
human
close
for them to make a comic based on your face, I feel.
But it was actually kind of fun that that for people who had been reading the Ultimate Comics to see when he shows up at the end of Iron Man, they're just like, whoa, because it wasn't David Hasselhoff who had been Nick Fury in a made-for-TV movie years before.
I take back what I just said.
See, that right there, Robert, like, I mean, because obviously I didn't know, like, the Nick Fury thing, but, like, after watching, like, Marvel movies, because I'm really into, like, the Marvel movies, and getting into them, and especially, like, Marvel or MCU Phase 1, as we were, like, at the end of each movie, we were kind of getting little pieces of this really, scary dude, Thanos, and, like, I just remember after watching any of the movies, I would because I hadn't read the comics or anything like that. And so like I would always turn to my friends who I knew read the comics and I'm like, so what did that mean? Like I just wanted to like know more, but I didn't want to actually like do the work myself, which just sounds so silly. But like it really wasn't until it was actually about 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more, when I like was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna actually buy my first comic. And it was when we went on a trip to Denver to Mile High Comics. I went with Steph and Blake, and this was about a year before I met Jayson, so he wasn't there. And a couple of our other friends, and I was like, hey, let's do this. I've got some money to spend. Let's go, and it was just like so much fun to just kind of pick some of those favorite characters, kind of like what you were saying at the top of the episode. Like one of the big reasons, and like for me, it's that I want to know some alternative stories to these characters that I have met through the movies and TV shows. Like, because one of my most favorites, and I have a few different iterations, is Daredevil, and I'm like, I need more.
So did your Daredevil fandoms begin with the Netflix series?
Yes.
Okay.
Charlie Cox. Yep.
D'Onofrio. He is one of the best Marvel villain depictions ever.
I am sad that the SUV did not get a best supporting actor role.
Oh my gosh, yes. But I mean, I did watch the Ben Affleck. It was Ben Affleck, right?
It was Ben Affleck.
Yeah, I watched that movie, and I remember because it was a long time ago, but I remember a lot of people were like, "Oh, this movie sucked," but I was like, it wasn't that bad, and because I think I just really liked the character, and so then when they came out with the Netflix show, I was like, oh, okay, I like this better, so much better, and I just want to know more, and like now I have to do a quick show and tell. Our friend had me get the Guardian Devil. Daredevil one, and it was just like such a different Daredevil than I've like really known, and I think I need to reread it again because I don't remember a ton of details, but like I just remember it was just like so different than anything I ever thought it was going to be. But like I like that too though, because again it's just about hearing all these different stories, and it kind of makes me wonder sometimes like how did these filmmakers and movie producers, all these people, like how did they decide which storyline to go with? Like, because there's just so many. Like, I don't know. Like, how do you pick? How do you pick the good ones?
If you're DC, you don't do anything that they have in their,
Like,
in their
talk
canon.
about this so much.
You just avoid anything that you have that's good, and then you just make a movie.
You make an incredible book, and then you're like, eh.
I think in the MCU as well, like they have bits and pieces from the origins of the characters, but by and large, and they might take bits and pieces from different storylines, but they're creating their own storylines as well. So it's always hard when somebody's like, where can I find this story in the comics, or what happens next based on they're doing their own thing in the MCU. Like you can't really kind of base it off. They take bits and pieces. I mean, Sam Wilson becoming Cap, that's in the comics and there's precedence there and things like that. But the way it unfolds is totally different in the comics than it is in the MCU.
Well,
So
Steve was old in both of them. What are you talking about?
yeah, but he got old differently.
yes, he did.
Different ways of getting old in both of them.
Well, and you can look at like X2 where people are crying out to get like Gambit in there, and then they did what they did to Ryan Reynolds. Or no,
that was Wolverine Origins.
That was Wolverine Origins with Deadpool. Yeah.
We don't talk about that movie.
No.
But Gambit was also in Wolverine Origins. So
I mean, Deadpool fixed it. So
yeah, he had to go back and fix it because everyone was wanting the character in the movies, and
you want to talk about a big like screw you to comic book fans. You sew Deadpool's mouth shut so he can't talk. Like
the merc with a mouth no longer has a mouth.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I remember everyone lost their minds at that because again, at the time when Wolverine X-Men, that movie came out, I was like, I didn't know I didn't know that much about Deadpool, and so people were freaking out, and I'm like, okay, what's the big deal? And like, I feel like there were some people who like couldn't really articulate because they were so upset.
They were so angry.
Foamy at the mouth.
So you kind of talked about this, Robert, and I think it's an interesting question. I kind of call it to me, it's the Doctor Who principle, and only because I remember going through this with Doctor Who years ago. I wanted to start watching, but it was coming up on the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. So where do you start watching Doctor Who? So I had to figure that out, and I found my starting point. But with comics, I mean, Superman and Batman are both 80 plus years old now.
Superman,
Spider-Man's coming up. This year's the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man, right?
Well,
This year?
It is, and there was the last week was the 85th anniversary of Action Comics 1 first appearance of Superman.
Yep.
So you've got 85 years of a character. Where do you start with that? Especially when DC has this great, like, who is it? Staples had the easy button. DC has the reboot button, and they press
Yeah.
it about every 10 to 15 years. It seems
It's
like,
their
if
favorite
not
button.
more often.
They love it.
And they hit the first time they did it was in 1985, and they did a line-wide reboot because they realized we have way too many characters, way too many tie-ins, and it's hard for anybody to start reading comics, to know where to jump in. So we figure we'll restart and just kind of baseline everything and go again. And they rewrote some characters' histories when they did it, and it made things simpler as far as getting into the titles for especially the flagship characters like Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman, because you got great introductory stories for them from huge artists at the time. I remember they'd had George Perez was writing and drawing Wonder Woman when they rebooted her. John Byrne did Superman in a fantastic 6-issue miniseries called Man of Steel, and I can't remember who they got to do Batman right out of the gate. Chris, Nope. Okay.
I would look over to Andy at this point and say, "Hey, what is it?"
and he would know.
Mhm.
But it was great. They in fluctuating some of the stories and adjusting some of the histories, they changed like one of my favorite long-time favorite comics, The Legion, which was basically a group of teenage superheroes in the future that became superheroes because of Superman and his adventures as Superboy. But Crisis wiped out Superman having ever been Superboy, so they had to play with other characters to go, you can fit here, you can go here. But when you have continuity changes like that, sometimes it's a little rough for longer term fans, but it's a good place for newer fans to go, okay, I know X about the character, and this will give you some basis, and they'll lay a pretty solid groundwork in most cases for newer audiences. And Marvel has done similar recently with their Secret Wars Battle World, where they basically said, we're going to destroy the universe and then bring it back together, and then destroy it again and then bring it back together, and it'll be okay. And I'm not sure how well received it was, generally speaking. Wasn't my favorite. It introduced some new characters, but
Well, I remember it was probably like, I don't know, it was recent, about 6 when they rebooted and they did Jane Foster Thor, and the reception of that wasn't great. I remember Facebook losing their minds. People who I probably assume haven't read the comic saying that they're ruining their childhood character.
Yes.
People saying that this is there's my
The Mighty
I
Thor.
want to say I was reading Mighty Thor before it like came out and people hated it and people were talking crap about it because I thought that it was cool to take the character and twist them. And I remember people talking about how it was ruining everything, but then they didn't know that Thor was a frog at one point, and that the power of Mjolnir, and not to gatekeep. I'm not here to gatekeep. People can have their feelings, but to maybe know the history a little bit better and to realize how Mjolnir worked in this rendition of it. And I guess too, that's another part of it as well.
Well, to be fair, Mjolnir has worked the same for all the characters up until recently when or at least, and also in the movies, it kind of reflected this. The enchantment on it is whosoever is worthy to lift his hammer will have the power of Thor. So Thor was found unworthy in a series called Fallen Sun, I believe. It was a Marvel crossover, and Thor lost the ability to be worthy enough to wield the hammer, and he couldn't lift it, and left it on the moon. So Jane, we don't really question how she got there, but she was able to pick it up. Unlike the movie where the fragments all came together. And
that's what I was going to say too. That's why I feel like for like some comic book fans too, the Love and Thunder was not well received for the changes they made towards that. But I think you can ignore that and still enjoy it. But
well, true. But as a long-term fan, yes, I can see the point. The problem of they change this in horrifically. For somebody who is just going, oh, there's a female Thor, why is she Thor, and then want to go into where that came from. Jason Aaron and it wasn't Robbie Rodriguez, Daughtry, I can't remember his first name, who's the artist on that title, did a fantastic job of telling the story and actually keeping a good secret for, I think, 7 issues of who this new Thor was, because you never saw her out of her helmet, for example. And she kept dropping clues about who she was to Thor, but not saying outright, and then just disappearing. So using the movies as a springboard to kind of pique your curiosity, and then go into a shop. You can find any of your local shops will be happy to help you find whatever you're looking for to give you background on the character. Starting off with trying to find single issues for some things may be harder, especially if you're trying to find a character whose number 1 hasn't been out for 5-10 years. But you can find a trade paperback where you're going to get usually a complete story arc in one book and get the entire story in one.
I'll cut in right there, Robert, because what I got here, I don't want to like be demeaning to our audience, but we're talking about like from the beginning, people that are starting this. And so what I have is I have All-Star Superman. Here's the trade paperback.
Perfect.
And then here is all the single issues.
So the thing with All-Star Superman is also that's kind of an DC would call it an Elseworlds title.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a canon. But when you go to the store, you're going to see these all up on the wall.
Yeah.
You want to go look for, if you're starting, I would suggest looking for the book.
Yeah.
Because this will have a complete story.
And typically the trade paperback will be a lot cheaper than finding issue number 1 of any title.
Jake's trying to make a joke about that, Fleck.
No, I was not trying to make a joke about that. But I was going to say it is similar, like Marley was showing Guardian Devil, which is a graphic novel that it originally was, 6 or 7 floppy issues. You're going to have a hard time finding those issues, but finding the trade paperback is going to be easier. And I agree with Blake. I think that's a great, like, if you're wanting to get introduced to these characters, the number one thing that you mentioned, Robert, was going to your local comic book shop. Like, that's where you've got to go.
Absolutely.
Don't try to find it on Amazon. Don't try to find it online. Don't try to go to a local comic book shop, because they're going to point you in the right direction to what a good story would be to start out with that character, and then get the trade paperback for that story. Like, if you want to get into X-Men, you like Days of Future Past, the movie, like, get the trade paperback of Days of Future Past. Don't try to get each issue that's in that storyline.
And for me, All-Star Superman's my favorite Superman story. And so this is I got the trade paperback first. And then because I love it and I love collecting them, I went and found the single issues so I could have those.
Yeah. And that's wrong that it's your favorite one. It should be Kingdom Come, but that's okay. We'll let it slide.
Kingdom Come isn't just a Superman story.
It is absolutely a Superman story. I don't care that there are other characters in it. It is absolutely a Superman story.
Anyways, Kingdom Come is fine, and that's for another topic.
It's not fine. It's fantastic.
But I have a funny story to go along with how I obtained all the single issues.
Garage sale?
Not a garage.
No, because he's scared of those.
Like you're rich.
So Stephanie is going into labor with our second child. And
this is already a bad start.
She's literally giving birth, okay? And I'm like holding her hand, and I'm like, "You're doing a great job, sweetheart. I love you so much." And out of the corner, I hear the notifications going off on my phone, because I was in an auction to buy these comic books. And the whole time I'm just thinking, I hope I'm winning. And I did. I won all of them. So good job, man.
So this is
the whole live child. So
this is what you have to look forward to if you're getting into comic books. That you will at one point be on auctions buying issues of comic books while your wife is in labor.
But we named my son. Henry
Yeah, your
Reed.
son's got
Oh,
a great
don't
name.
try to make
So
it.
it makes sense.
Don't
He's
try
Superman.
to make it that
Anyways.
you bought it for him.
Anyways, it was fitting that I was buying a Superman comic for him someday.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Anyways, another reason why I wanted to bring this up, and another reason why we're doing the podcast right now, is because All-Star Superman was available for Free Comic Book Day.
Oh.
And that is next week, yeah? We're
It
coming up in a couple
is-
weeks?
No, it's the week after next. It is May 6th.
The first Saturday in May.
First Saturday in May, you can go to your local comic shop and actually get literally free comic books. Different shops will have kind of different rules. You can usually get at least 5 or 6 comics. Some of them will be like run the gamut and get as many of them. You can find a list of the comics that are available either on previews. I think it's previewsworld.com. I think there's also freecomicbookday.org, I believe. You find the list of like the gold, silver, and general titles. There are going to be comics for all ages. From there will be kids titles. You can take your kids to the comic shop. A lot of shops will have people who are in cosplay there, just to kind of bolster up the fun a little bit. And it's usually a really fun event, no matter where you go. But definitely look into it.
Yeah. If you go like in the morning when the shops are open, there's typically a line. Like, be prepared for that, because there's a lot of people that there are specific free issues that they want to pick up. Maybe it's a preview of a new series that's coming out or whatever, and so they want to pick up those issues. So be prepared for that and just enjoy that experience. Like, that's the manage the expectations part. Don't go and think, like, if you go on a normal like Tuesday in the middle of the day to a comic book shop, you're probably not going to deal with a long line of people getting in the door. But on Free Comic Book Day, you will, if you go in the first thing in the morning,
And
which is great. I love it.
I would say generally the free comics that they're giving out are like All-Star Superman like they're the good issues, they aren't giving out the garbage ones that they're just trying to get out the door. They're trying to promote real stories that are engaging right now.
Would they have given out Kingdom Come one?
No.
Well, no, because that was
too good.
That
to
one
give
sold
out.
itself. That one sold itself.
Okay.
They didn't have to try to tempt people to get that one.
Yeah.
You're right, Blake, because that's the whole point, right? They want you to come and get the free issues and then say, well, now I want to find out. Yeah. Now I want to find out more. So you go back to get more.
Then
and if
you have to pay to feed the habit.
If you're there on Free Book Day, like, pick up a couple of issues that aren't free, because the comic book owners, the shop owners appreciate that as well.
Support small business, support local business.
Well, and they pay for the free comics. The the publishers don't send them and just be like, "Hey, give these away." It's like they're heavily discounted, but they are paid for, and so it's a promotion. But yeah, it's a great jumping on point, like you said. And sometimes they'll have the shops will have a creator guest that will do signatures or sketches for the kids and that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of, especially here in Utah, the shops put a lot of effort into making that a fun time for people.
Well, since you put that out there, Chris, are you or any of the Velleity Studio team going to be at any of the local shops doing signings or?
I realized that just seemed like self self-promotion.
We're here
Shameless
for it.
self-promotion.
If it is, we're here for it, Chris. Don't worry about it.
All over it.
No, we are. Yeah, well, Velleity Studios, me and my co-writer Andrew Malin will be at Dr. Volt's in for Free Comic Book Day, and I know that at Black Cat Comics in Sugar House that they are going to have the creators behind Bleak Haven, which is a local comic, and then they at the Nerd Store in West Valley, they are going to have Doug Wagner, who is the writer of the Image books, Vinyl, Plush, The Ride, and he's worked in comics for forever. Used to work for Marvel and done work for DC, and also the Mighty Uton. Travis will be there, and so he's Travis Romney. He's gonna be doing signatures and stuff there. So it's a great time. And sometimes there's people who will go to several shops in one day. They'll go to one shop, try to get everything, and then they'll go to the next one. And but yeah, it's a lot of fun. It was starting to get to the point where they would have like bands in the parking lot and stuff, where they're getting to like Lollapalooza level of stuff, and then it was like, okay, we need to back this up a little bit. But I think this one's going to be pretty nuts because it's like the first really big one after the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Can I bring up something here? Like we've been talking like how to get into comic books. And these are all great suggestions about how to do it. Can I suggest something that is just a terrible way to get into comics?
By all means.
Absolutely.
So by looking up a best comics of all time list and then going out and buying Watchmen or Miracle Man or
Do you have something against Michael Moore?
Michael Moore? No.
Okay.
Alan Moore.
Step strikes again.
I try so hard.
You're absolutely right though. Like Alan Moore is a space wizard and he's one of the best writers of all time. But there are those and even Kingdom Come which is a fantastic comic, one of my favorites.
Yeah.
There's a set of those S tier comics that are maybe read some other comics for a while. Those comics are great because there was 40, 60 years worth of comics that go into understanding why these are genre bending, crazy good comics because of what you read before, right, Jake?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I enjoyed Kingdom Come because of my history and reading comics and everything. And it was really entertaining and interesting. And I agree, like Watchmen too, like it hits different when you are familiar with the superhero genre, right? If that's that's your introduction to the superhero genre.
Wow.
That's a heck of an introduction. Like, you know,
it's
you're
a
not necessarily
deconstruction of the genre, right? So it's like one of those things where you can enjoy it on a surface level. You can just enjoy it, and that's exactly the way Zack Snyder enjoyed it, was on a surface level of just superheroes hitting each other. You know what I mean? And it's a great way to enjoy that. But and more power to you. You want to go read Watchmen, use your first comic, go for it. You know what I mean? But just saying, maybe that's one to hit when it's so genre defining or it's such a good deconstruction of the genre, it has become a great example of the genre.
Right.
And it's like RoboCop, the movie, you know what I mean? It was made as a parody of violent movies, but it did such a good job of it that it is like one of the best violent movies ever made. And so that's just the suggestion. It's like when you do look at those big lists, there are great comics on it, but if you starting with Watchmen is pretty rough. Although reading it and then reading more comics and then reading it again later is also a cool experience too. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, just you sit there and if you get someone who's snooty about it and they're like, ooh, you know, I only read this stuff. And then they'll pitch you into a whole bunch of like very heavy comics that are like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And maybe not as fun as what you're looking for, but maybe it is what you're looking for. I don't want to judge what anybody's thinking, but we used to, when I worked at the comic book store, we tried not to do that when people would come in, and we didn't try to do that bludgeon them over the head with the things that were like, here's the encyclopedias, you know?
And I think that's a good point also, is that going into your local comic shop, the sellers there 9 times out of 10, actually 9.5 times out of 10, want to help you find that thing that you're looking for. Not just because they want another customer, but they honestly just like making people happy. It's like, and if they know that there's a character that warm fuzzy spot for you, they want to give you more of that or to help you find more of that and what it is that, you know, you're going to be interested in. So I know that there's a lot of people look at it and they'll go to a comic shop and be like, I don't know where to start. And it's just, you know, they start to sweat. It's like, what do I do? Go to the counter, talk to, you know, the people that work in the store and go, hey, I'm looking for, you know, Spider-Man. I'm looking for Batman. I'm looking for whomever it is, you know, and I just don't tell them I want to get started. You know, I'm trying to find a couple of stories that will give me some background with the character, some of a good entry point, and they'll help you. That's what they're there to do.
And literally any genre. Oh, sorry, Jake.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was gonna say, if you come in, there's a comic book for every subject. If you come in with anything, you can go to the counter and say, I am looking for historical fiction. They've got it. I'm looking for movie adaptations. I got it. You know what I mean? Any of those things you can find.
Steph and I gathered together all of our books that are not superheroes. So we've got Handmaid's Tale. And these are not just books, they're comics. Like
they're graphic novels,
Yeah.
Woman World.
I
Heart.
also need to
The Alchemist.
You skipped Heartstopper, which is the cutest queer love story of all time. It's now on Netflix.
so
Game of Thrones is a graphic novel.
So you can literally find just about anything, and they are happy
Yeah.
to help.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
the
Blake has that
possibility is
action
endless.
Bible back there.
and if you walk into a store and they're not happy to help you, go to
Walk
the
out.
Go to a
next
different
comic book
store.
Walk
store
out.
because and the three that we mentioned here, the Nerd Store, Dr. Volt's, Black Cat, you're going to have a great experience. Everybody there is very friendly, very knowledgeable. I would say, like, don't go necessarily on a Wednesday if you're wanting to take a lot of time to pick out something and you want them to help you, because that's their busiest. New comic books come out on Wednesday.
Second busiest day is Tuesday
Saturdays.
when they're putting them on the shelves.
Yeah.
But newsflash, nerds like to talk about their stuff.
Yes,
Absolutely. They
That's
Wait,
why
really?
That's why we created an entire podcast.
Yeah. But I've only
That's
had
why.
one experience at one store that wasn't great, and that store is no longer in business, so it's
because
fine.
Jake put it out of business.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Jake
right.
got
Put
on
them on
Yelp.
blast
Jake
on Yelp.
to the
No, I didn't put anybody out of business.
Go look
They're
at the
just
Google reviews or the Yelp reviews. They're honest. Like I went to a shop. I won't say which one, but it was in Minnesota. And if you go there and you read the reviews, all of the reviews are, this guy doesn't like talking to people. I don't know why he owns a comic book store. And it's 100% true. There was like 30 reviews like that, and that was the honest truth. You know what I mean? So if you go in there, absolutely. So, but you were saying on those genres and stuff like that, I actually have, this was a textbook that they had at the University of Utah.
Oh my gosh.
I
It's a
love it.
comic book about Obamacare to explain how Obamacare worked. There's nothing you cannot find. It doesn't matter the genre. You will be able to find it in a comic book.
It's great.
That's cool.
And you know that's another. Both of you made, or all of you made good points about that. Where a lot of people think comic books and they just think capes and tights,
Yeah.
and that's not the only thing out there. I mean, it goes from manga. There are romantic comics. There are comic adaptations of literature that are actually good ways to get your kids into literature by sneaking it in as a comic book. And they're also, speaking of that, a great way to get your kids to start reading. Literally, we taught our kids to read from comic books. There was a comic book called Tiny Titans that came out about 10 years ago,
Great
and
comic.
I bought it because I thought it was just cute, adorable, and fun. And we started, when my girls got to be about 2.5, 3 years old, I just gave the books to them so that they keep them entertained on car rides. And one day we're going somewhere and I hear talking in the back seat, and I'm not paying attention, and I start phasing into what the conversation is, and it's not a conversation. It's one of my girls reading the dialogue in the story, and I'm just kind of like, wait, what? That just happened. And started reading from there. And to this day, 8 years later, they're like, did you, when I go to the comic shop, like, did you bring us anything?
Yeah.
So I am happy to buy them comics because they're reading and they love reading. So, I mean,
Reading,
it's also a great thing, great for that. So consider that as you're trying to find a way to get your kids into something. There you go.
reading
Y'all remember
reading is
Captain
reading.
Underpants?
I'm not sure if they read Captain Underpants. They've done Dog Man, and there's a cat or a corollary book for that.
Yeah.
Dogman is, my kids love that. Horrifying story. If you read that, it's a children's book, and it's literally like the guy's been decapitated and they put a dog's head on him.
Oh my god!
And it's a great comic book, but it is like, but it's a little kid story. You think about it too.
My daughter, going back to the reading thing, my daughter is known at her school for being a reader. Like, the librarian kept track of how many books she read from the library last year, and it was just an unbelievable number, like 1,000 books. It wasn't that high, but it was a lot of books. And she just reads nonstop. And they know, like, every new book that comes in, it's like, hey, Eliza, do you want this book? Well, when she was first learning how to read, she was not into it until she found a book called El Defo, which is a graphic novel that was similar to her experience because it was about a deaf girl in school, and it was her making her own superhero called El Defo. And that got her from there. It was more graphic novels like that, like Babysitter's Club and Smile. And there's some great kids graphic novels out there. And then from there, she just got totally into reading and now always has a book in her hand. So my parents always thought comics was a waste of time and it wasn't like real reading because my parents were dumb. And now we know reading is reading and it doesn't matter whether it's comics or not. Like it's a great way to get them into reading and start that journey for them.
So I had a question that I wanted to bring up to the group. It's something that I think is going to become more evolved. I don't know. How do you guys feel about digital comics? Are you guys for it? Are you against it? I know it hurts local comic book shops. What do you guys think? And I guess for anybody, it's literally like a comic. You download it on your iPad. You can swipe. What do you guys think about that?
They're part of the ecosystem, right? Like they are. They're nice when you don't, if you travel a lot, you know. It's I always really enjoyed having my comic collection on a device that I could get a whole bunch. It took like one of the bigger iPads to really feel like a comic. What I feel like on this is that I wish that comics on digital devices would take advantage of the medium that they're on to do things you couldn't do in print. I think that, and it takes more, it's a different thing you're creating at that point, right? It might not even be considered a comic book anymore. And I don't know what exactly that is. I've seen a lot of people who do things where like one of the panels will animate, or you can change a character view in a panel so that it reveals something. It's part of the mystery or something like that. But I think we're moving in that direction. You know what I mean? It's just taking a while to get there. But that's what I would like to see more in like digital comics is like, even if it was just like, I saw a comic one time where you could take a slider and you could take the comic book back through the phases of its creation. So you'd take and then you could take it back so that there was just the inks, just take it back to the pencils, take it back to the sketches and that sort of stuff. But that all takes time. And I think a lot of the publishers and whatnot right now, it's not worth the money for the extra effort, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it actually for me was a way that I got into comics is through digital books. And I did it because it was easy access for me and it was easier for me to just read the stories. But now that I've gotten more into it and I actually like collecting them and having the physical copies, definitely I'm in the shops and buying the books and things like that. But I don't want to discredit them as part of a way to get into this genre. But I want people to use it as a tool to get into the shops. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to get into comics because you can get like a subscription to like Comic Vine or like Marvel's got their Marvel Unlimited, and I don't know what DC has because they change the name every week.
Yeah,
but you can get one of those subscriptions, and then you can get access to a lot of the back issues and the backstories without having to track them down, without having to find them. It's a little bit less overwhelming if you're not ready to make that jump of going into the store and asking about it or trying to find a particular story or issue. Makes it a little bit easier to do that. But I agree that like where I'm at with, and it's not just with digital comics, it's the same way with ebooks and it's the same way with music. Like I like the convenience of having the digital stuff. I like the convenience of being able to take multiple graphic novels with me if I'm traveling somewhere and I can read them on my iPad instead of having to take a stack of them. But I also have to have my physical copies of stuff. Most of my reading now is audiobooks, but I have a shelf full of my favorite books because I have to have the physical copies too.
Well,
So
and it's definitely convenient, especially if you're after a specific issue or story that it's probably not available at the local comic book store, or maybe you don't have time to run to one. I don't know, like because for me, I'm gonna do a selfish plug for our very own podcast, Age of Geek. We did a Daredevil Born Again episode. It was near the beginning. It was definitely like last summer.
Like episode 2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, and it was like one of my most favorite episodes because like, I mean, for one thing, the topic, but also we wanted to talk about that specific comic because that was right when, I think that was right after they had announced, they meaning the MCU had announced that they were going to be doing a new Daredevil series. and it was called Born Again. And so I'm like, well, I want to know what that is. Like, I want to know what the Born Again comic is. And so we did an episode on it. Anyways, long story short, we were able to get a digital copy of it. It was on Amazon Music or Amazon Comics, whatever it's called, and I was able to read it that way, and it just made it like a lot more convenient. But then I feel like, just to kind of help bring Blake's point to it and kind of getting you to the comic book store, like while I was on that episode, and hearing from the other, because Jake, you were on that, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake and the people, everyone was like giving like all sorts of like, try this Daredevil comic, try this one, try this one. So I like wrote a list, and I'm like, hey, now I'm gonna go to the store, the comic book store, and find these specific comics so I can keep going. Because like I like the physical copies too. Even though I'm such an audiobook listener, like I also I love to have my favorites in the physical form. And like comic books, I think that there's just something different about just holding it in front of your face like that. And I'm also one of those weirdos. I like the smell of like paper and like print and like comic books, so I'm like sniffing it. So there's something to be said for that.
There is. I've got a multi-layered answer. I'll start with where Chris went with the digital comics not doing enough. Marvel tried something about 15 years ago, give or take, called motion comics, where they took some of their good selling titles at the time and animated panels from them, and then they collected them like on either DVD or they just put them online. You could get they were called motion comics. One of them that came out was yet another Brian Michael Bendis title, Spider-Woman, Agent of Sword. And I had read the series as a Dead Tree series before, and then saw that they did a motion comic. I'm like, let's see what this is like. And I actually quite enjoyed it. They had it, it was narrated, so you have somebody who's reading or narrating the story, different actors for different voices of different characters, and that was fun. Digital comics, I do like the ability of having something on my Kindle or iPad and being able to go, I've got all of these books and I'm taking them with me, as opposed to the 20 something boxes of comics sitting in the storage room. Which that's a lot of just paper that's just sitting there. So I mean, there's what's more convenient for you? Is it going to the store? Is it being able to just punch up a website and go, I want to download this comic, I want to get this issue. For me, I am probably 99% a Dead Tree comic reader, because I also enjoy going in and talking to people in the store. And if they're not in the middle, if they're not, elbow deep in customers or shelving books and they have time to chat, it's a great time, because you not only get, to ask questions about characters you enjoy, but you get to find out, where they are in comics, what got them there, what they would recommend for you outside of what you would normally want to read. So, I mean, there's bonuses to both sides of it. Digital comics is a good jumping off point that was mentioned for getting your feet wet with a character or a team or a title or series, and then branch off and go into the store and say, hey, I read this. What more can you tell me? What more can you recommend for me based on this, or even completely opposite of this?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Plus, if you're traveling with your digital comics, they're not going to get bent or ripped or torn or damaged in any way.
And there's an interesting thing, and I've actually come to an epiphany over the years, having kids who have read my comics and that happening, is that I enjoy sharing my comics with my kids, the ones that are appropriate for them to read. And like I said, they're voracious readers, and it started with comics, it has continued, moved on to chapter books, and I mean, they are plowing through anything they can get their hands on, really. But I've also come to realize that outside of certain titles or certain key issues for me, it's I'm not as worried about it. So if something gets torn, like if it's a book that I like, going back to this Legion issue, this is a copy of one of the first series I consistently started purchasing as a 10-year-old. I'd read other comics before. I'd like early reprints of perfect, the X-Men, because in the okay, Steph, get ready. In the 70s, Marvel was doing reprints of the classic X-Men titles shortly after they did the giant size X-Men with the characters that people now know today as being the X-Men. But they were reprinting the older stuff. So, I'd go and get those at the 7-Eleven or at the local supermarket and get those. But outside of issues that have some kind of meaning for me, that will then get, I'll put them in a hard case and put them on my wall or put them somewhere safe. It's, there's certain things like, okay, this is a good read once. I don't need to read this again. Or if I want to get something that's going to be a little more durable, I'll get it in a graphic novel format or a trade paperback where I can, have all of them in one package, put it on the shelf and call it good.
Yeah.
You're not gonna let your kids crack into your hardcovers? Your rated ones? Not gonna let them.
Probably not.
Okay, fine.
So that does bring up another thing, and I know we're coming up on over an hour, but I wanted to ask, where do you guys think the realm of comics are right now in terms of collecting? Because that to me is like, you get into comics, you start reading comics, and then the next step then would be you become a collector of certain issues. Do you guys see that becoming? I don't see that becoming like a job. People, you're not going to make money doing it.
I think when you're talking about like collecting as an investment, buying modern comics, there's not going to be the return that you're looking for there. It's just not going to be worth it because there's so many copies that are printed. People do a much better job of preserving them. The reason why Action Comics #1 is so valuable is because at that time nobody put their comics in bags and boards. Right. Nobody kept them nice, and they were just trashed. And so finding any issue in any condition is a big deal.
Installation of someone's wall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One Action Comics #1.
So I think as far as that goes, like, it's hard to see yourself getting the same return investment if that's what you're looking for. I mean, in the 90s, again, Wild Time, Chris, you brought this up at the beginning of the episode. Like, that was, I remember when The Death of Superman came out and it was in that black sealed cellophane bag. And like within a week, it was being sold for like $500 for that issue. It was crazy. Wow. And then like a month later, he was back. Like they did, it was shortly after
about a year later.
Yeah, it was about a year, but it was shortly after that. And there were so many of those copies out there. Like it just, now you could find that for a lot cheaper than $500. Like it just lost its value so fast. But there were so many things that they were pumping out like that, where it's like, put this out there. Every special issue that we can think of, you'd have holograms on the covers. You'd have, I remember an X-Men 30th anniversary issue that had like holographic X's all over the cover and everything. And it looked really cool. And I thought this is going to be worth so much money someday. And it's not, because there was just so many of them out there. And that was when people started looking at it like baseball cards, where if you preserved it and you kept it nice, it would have value. And so people started collecting for that reason. And when there's a lot of them out there that have been preserved, it just doesn't hold the same value as the older ones, in my opinion.
And even to get it like CGC rated, it costs like what, $60-$70 a piece.
Depends on the book. Yeah.
Depends on the book. Yeah. And
so you're investing in it that way, and you might not get the return that you're putting into it.
When I get into one of these days, I'm going to do a PhD program. And one of the things that I'm going to study is the price elasticity of collectibles based on my income, because I will go and look at old comic books from the 80s. There used to be this comic book store, and everybody,
really old.
I know. I was going to say back before that, but it is again. Very old sentence. But what you used to do is you would open up Marvel Comics and there was this yellow ad in the middle of the book that was for back issues. It was Mile High Comics and there was a couple others in New York that were selling those. And if you look through the prices on stuff in there now, where it's like a Fantastic Four is $100, Fantastic Four #1 is $100, Hulk 181, the first appearance of Wolverine, is like $12 or something like that, like books that are like $20,000, $5,000, $7,000 now. But at the time, $200 to me might as well have been $20,000. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't gonna. So collectibles, and I think it's just people of our age, right? Like Rob, back me up on this, right?
Our age, yeah.
Our age. You're there's an amount of money. Like when I worked at the comic book store, I couldn't afford the money books that were on the wall. You know what I mean? Even though like what it was at the time, I would buy them all today. Shut down the store. I'm putting these all on my credit card. But now you look at it, and then also with the uprise, like what you're talking about now, is the rise of the clean and press industry that's around comic books, that I think is really, it's crazy to watch these Facebook groups that I watch, where people will take a comic and they will iron it and like clean it with like makeup removing pads and do all this crazy stuff with it, and then put it in a hot iron t-shirt press thing, and then and they'll start where the grade would have been like an 8.5, an 8.7 or something like that. But then they get it back and it's like a 9.2, 9.8 or something like that. When you're talking about a first appearance of Wolverine, that's thousands of dollars difference, Right. And so that's also making a huge thing where people are like, if it's below a 9, I don't even care. Why are you spending money on garbage? You know what I mean? It's like there's a set of people like that too. So this like fracturing and diversification of like the collector's market, the people who buy, and so that's why I'm with you. It's like if you buy a book that you love, it doesn't matter what price it ever gets to. If it goes up in price, wonderful. You know what I mean? That's great. I have something that I can leave to my kids or something like that. You know what I mean? But yeah, those things where it's trying to buy modern comic books or even older comic books and then flip them for a profit is kind of like trying to stand on the side of the freeway and hit every car that's going by that has a red hood with a rock. It's really hard. There's some people that can do it, and you have to you can get quite lucky. But yeah, if you jump into comics with stuff that you like, then you'll always have a comic you like.
Yeah. I think the first time I remember buying a comic as a kid that I was like, oh, this is going to be worth some money someday, was a #1 that I found on the newsstand. It was a new character that had come out, and Marvel had partnered with the NFL, and it was the Super Pro was his name. And I picked that up thinking this is going to be worth so much money someday. And it wasn't, because nobody cared about the character. And and I was a kid and I was dumb. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And it wasn't, because in my mind, it was a #1. You got to buy the #1 because that's what's going to be the most valuable someday. It depends on the #1, but yeah, it's interesting. I agree. If you're buying books, buy what you enjoy. If you're doing it as an investment, then it's just not worth it to get into it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings us full circle on to to getting into it for the thing that you love, and or something that you have a curiosity about, and they could become something that you love, and not as investment. So we should probably just begin wrapping it up here. As we mentioned before, Free Comic Book Day is coming up in 2 weeks on May 6th. Check your local comic book shops here in Salt Lake City. That's going to be Dr. Volt's Comic Connection, Black Cat Comics, and the Nerd Store. Check in your area to see what local shops are available to you. Go in, have a great time. Go early because the lines will start early. And when you get in there, may not be the best time to talk to the staff because they're going to be slightly busy. But go in. If there's local artists there, please go and support them. Talk to them. Find out what got them to start writing their books. With that, we're going to thank Chris Hoffman for coming on and talking comics with us.
Wait,
No,
wait,
no, no,
wait.
no.
I want to, before we end, have everyone give like a suggestion or two of books that people should check out, or like their own. And you have to keep it to one or two, Robert. Just like good book title suggestions that maybe they wouldn't have thought of.
Fine. One that's recently come out that is a 4-issue miniseries that I love what they've done with the character is the new champion of Shazam, starring Mary Marvel as the Captain Marvel character. That's been a good one. It's a quick, fun, light read. Let's see, does Marvel, I'm sure, has something that I could go with. It's eluding me at the moment, so I'm not going to go there.
Nothing going on in Marvel.
Other stuff going on in Marvel, but it's getting a little jumbled again. I've enjoyed the X-Men titles, but there's like 11 of them, so I'm not going to recommend those as a start for people. Actually, I take that back. I will recommend Photon, which is starring Monica Rambeau, who was first seen in WandaVision. It is I believe, 6-issue miniseries. They're currently on issue 5, so you should be able to find this in your local shops. And this will be a kind of a good take for getting more familiar with the character and where she is before the Marvels movie comes out this summer or this fall. And Salt City Strangers in the Gall. There, 4.
Mara and Jason.
I mean, because I don't own a lot of comics, but there is one that one thing I do like a lot about comics is team ups. And so going back to Daredevil, there was one that a friend had recommended to me, and I think it's actually like, I think they've done it before. It's Marvel Knights, and like I feel like there's like so many different iterations, but it's the MK20 version that I have, and I think there's only like 6 issues. It's a very short like story, but it really appealed to me because, for one thing, it was short, and I could pretty easily find all of the issues. Not at the same store. It was a bit of a treasure hunt, but I thought that was a lot of fun. But the team up that I enjoy is Daredevil, Punisher, Elektra, and Black Panther. And I think, if I remember right, I think Hulk makes an appearance in this one. If I remember right, I might be getting it mixed up, but like I said, I think like having like a team up kind of comic book, if there's some different characters that you enjoy and you see them all on the cover, check it out. Start at the first issue, or if you can find it. So that's my recommendation.
If you don't want a quick read and you want to jump into something that's going to last you a while, when Chris mentioned a startup comic book with a female character, it reminded me of one of my favorite series. It's basically, I think it's considered a web comic or web story. You can Google it and find it. It's called Worm, and it's just this girl who starts off as a superhero and finds the most insane ways to beat the craziest villains you can think of, like Superman-esque type characters, with her ability to control bugs. And it's just fascinating, and the writing and character development is like one of the best I've ever listened to, and the world building is just incredible. He creates his own superhero universe, and it's just mind-boggling how well he does it. So if you want to look that up, it's called Worm, and you can listen to, I think most places you listen to podcasts, but it's free to listen to. So yeah.
Nice. Jacob B.
So I'm trying to think what I want to go with here. If you want, for the new Flash movie that's coming out, Flashpoint is a great series to pick up and read. It gives you a different spin on some of the characters that you are familiar with in the DC universe. Another one that I really like a lot of the Elseworld titles. And one of my favorite Superman ones that we haven't talked about yet is Red Sun, which takes the premise of what if Kal-El had landed in a field in Russia, in Soviet Russia, instead of in the middle of Kansas, and how that would be different. And it's a really great story. And then on the Marvel side, I really Robert, you mentioned what the X-Men are doing right now. I really like the X-Men stuff right now, and I think Dawn of X is a great graphic novel to pick up to kind of introduce you into the age of Krakoa and what's going on with the X-Men right now, because it's very different than what they've had in the past. So,
Steph and Blake.
I'll take a second to talk about a non-superhero book again, Heartstopper. We already talked about it just for a second. It's again like it's a YA queer romance. It's by Alice Oseman. It's really cute. It's really wholesome. It's super appropriate for teenagers. And they've just made a story, like a love story, really sweet and sentimental, but did it through graphic pictures. And it's kind of, I love the kind of difference where you see like kind of darker, bolder colors with the superheroes. It's kind of like more light with pinks and teals, and it just is a pretty book. And then I guess to touch on a superhero as well, I always love my girl Faith from Dark Horse Comics, who is this just completely lovely and wholesome, like plus size superhero. She has several books and series out. Yeah, look at how cute she is. So those are my two suggestions. I think I've picked several books just based on their covers, and they've turned out like being. I mean, picked up the Bombshell books because they're just, the art is just cool. So I don't be afraid to maybe check out people's like the covers of books and be like, I'm gonna try it.
My book is
ahead.
Kingdom Come. No, I'm just kidding. My book
And
is
Watchmen.
fantastic
Yeah,
choice.
Yeah, Watchmen.
My book is Supergirl from last couple years. James Gunn said that he's doing this as a movie. It's a super sci-fi version of Supergirl. It's really good, so I'd recommend it.
You also picked up Saga.
Yeah, I picked up Saga. It's also very sci-fi-y and is very mature, not for children. So don't let your kids read it. But it's really, 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 really good.
And it's been going on forever.
Mm-hmm. It's a saga.
But
Heyo.
It's in the name. Oh, those are great suggestions. I'll go with a couple of them here that are themed. It is Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month next month, as of this recording. And so I will recommend American Born Chinese by Jean Yang. It's a fantastic comic book that talks about three apparently separated, unrelated characters. It's Jin, who's moving into a new neighborhood to find out he's the only Chinese American student at his new school. The Monkey King, Sun Wukong, who I will read any comic book with the Monkey King in it. I absolutely love that. And then Chin Ki, who's a personification of the ultimate negative Chinese stereotype, who's running his cousin Danny's life with yearly visits. And it's going to be a TV show on Disney Plus. And so this is fantastic read. Read anything by Gene Yang. He's absolutely fabulous.
he's the one who redid Superman versus the Klan, wasn't he?
Yes, he is. That is also a fantastic book. So good. Did the Monkey Prince too. I mean, he's just great. There's nothing that he writes that's not fabulous. And then They Call This Enemy by George Takei from Star Trek. This talks about his time in the Japanese American internment camps during World War II. And so this is heavy subject, but very important. I feel like, in both of those good ways to celebrate the Heritage Month.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, I think that we will, call it almost 90 minutes and call it quits here. Thank everybody for listening and tuning in. Chris, thank you very much for your time. And do you have anything that you'd like to say outside of that you guys are going to be at Dr. Volt's for Free Comic Book Day?
You can find us on all the social medias at Velleity Studios, Velleity Studios, on TikTok, Instagram. Publishers take a good look at whether you have an audience on there. So give us a like or a follow on there. It sure will help us when we're taking our book Ruthless to the publishers, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for having me. Gosh, you guys are wonderful. This is I'll do this all night.
That's our
Don't say
problem
that.
too. We could do it all night.
Don't say that because it will happen.
Yeah.
Thank you again to the rest of our Age of Geek family, Marley, Jason, Jake, Steph, and Blake. And we will see you next time around. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Any of our socials.
This has been an Age of Geek media production.